Somewhere around the middle school age, a change in a preteen's attitude and demeanor typically becomes apparent. You see, an adolescent brain begins to undergo a massive reconstruction, and since this lasts approximately 10 to 15 years, I believe it's an important topic to discuss. In my opinion, not enough attention or sympathy is given to this thing called the teenage brain. Several years ago, I started educating myself on the subject, and the more I learned, the more my two daughters' behavior made sense. It also made me realize that I had to help my daughters protect themselves from the way their brains were currently functioning. For most kids, the adolescent years are stressful and painful. They are forced to navigate puberty, social issues, and of course, the massive remodeling of the brain. They may start to feel tension at home as they begin to seek independence from their parents, while being heavily influenced by their peers. And let's not forget about the smartphone and the immeasurable impact it can have on an individual's thought process and mindset. Socially, adolescents can encounter all kinds of challenges. The preteen years are when most kids recognize differences in themselves and in others, setting into motion the comparison trap. Insecurities run high, bullying becomes prevalent, and a sense of belonging might be difficult to find. Very few kids go unscathed. Self-esteem, self-image, and self-confidence can plummet and remain at low levels for several years, if not a lifetime. And you can imagine all of this has a direct impact on an individual's mental and emotional stability. On top of it all, kids can be easily weighed down by the pressures of academic performance, extracurricular participation, GPAs and SAT scores, and deciding on a future career path. It's no wonder why they are so irritable and exhausted. And speaking of exhaustion, most teenagers lack the proper amount of sleep. Experts agree that teenagers should receive 8 to 10 hours of sleep each night. But unfortunately, most teens do not fall asleep until after 11 p.m., primarily due to the timing of when the sleepy hormone melatonin is released in the brain. In a typical teenage brain, melatonin isn't released until around 10:45 p.m., sometimes as late as 1 o'clock in the morning, and continues to be released for the next 9 hours. Therefore, most teen brains do not naturally wake up from the sleep cycle until 8 a.m. or after. Since the majority of high schools start between 7:30 and 8 a.m., most teenagers have to roll out of bed during the 6 a.m. hour. Therefore, they are losing precious hours of sleep each week. Unfortunately, this issue cannot be resolved by making teens go to bed earlier. The sleep cycle of a teenager is not flexible or adaptive like an adult's. Research has proven that the timing of melatonin's release in a teenage brain is fixed, again, typically between 10:45 p.m. and 8 a.m. So logic would suggest that altering school schedules to support the function of a teenage brain would be beneficial. Experts insist that high school start times should be no earlier than 8:30 a.m. School systems that have implemented the later start time have seen a reduction in teen driving accidents, an increase in academic performance, and an improvement in mental health. It would also make sense to schedule tests, final exams, and state and college assessments no earlier than 9 or 10 a.m. This would allow for the teenage brain to be more awake and alert. In the meantime, as parents, we must be mindful of a teenager's natural sleep cycle. When our kids have the opportunity to sleep in, even if that means until noon or after, let them. If they say they are exhausted, believe them. If they come across cranky or temperamental, give them some grace. Compassion and understanding will go a long way in your relationships. It is probably no surprise to many of us that an adolescent's prefrontal cortex, or the executive center of the brain, is immature and underdeveloped. Therefore, teens struggle to regulate emotions, solve problems, plan, prioritize, and connect consequences to actions. But a lot of adults seem to lack understanding, or at the very least, compassion for the massive reconstruction process that is going on in an adolescent brain. Confusion, disorganization, forgetfulness, lack of focus, mood swings, and explosive and/or impulsive behavior are all side effects. Sound familiar? I realize that these side effects can be quite frustrating for us adults, but please try to sympathize with how overwhelmed our teens and preteens must feel on any given day. To make matters worse, the teenage brain is operating heavily in the middle of the brain, which is also known as the reward center. Therefore, teens are prone to pleasure-seeking activities and risky behaviors. When the brain expects a reward, the chemical dopamine is released. This not only gives teens a huge rush of pleasure, but their brains actually store the feel-good memory, making teenagers crave that feeling over and over again. This becomes especially concerning when kids are considering or partaking in activities involving sex, drugs, and alcohol. So does this mean our teens are on the brink of disaster? Maybe. We already know teens have a difficult time connecting consequences of their actions to the risk involved. Some kids have a hard time understanding how the activity is even risky. They just think it sounds fun. Then we need to consider how our kids are naturally wired. For example, some kids are adventurous, risk-takers, and thrill-seekers, while others are cautious, fearful, and rule followers. Next, we as caretakers must be fully engaged regarding who and what is influencing our kids' welfare. And finally, it is imperative that we make the appropriate adjustments to our parenting style as our teens inch closer and closer to adulthood. I have yet to meet one person who says parenting is easy. And just when we feel like we have this parenting thing down, our firstborn becomes a preteen, and then a teenager. But a few things are for certain. Adolescents need the proper guidance, which includes well-defined boundaries, proper protection, which includes being educated on how their brains are functioning, and proper support, which includes acquiring mental strength and stability to conquer life's battles. Stay strong, stay vigilant, and stay connected, because your teenagers need you more than ever.